Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about Nagarjuna's advice about how to run a government. Yeah, so Nagarjuna lived in the 2nd century AD. He was one of the greatest Buddhist thinkers, and his seminal work, Treatise on the Middle Way, is the root text for so many commentaries and treatises. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? So it could be louder, okay. Okay, how about now? No. You want to move closer? Yeah, we just have to do it so that it doesn't get feedback. Because you see, robes are not designed for these kind of things, yeah? They're designed for, somebody who has a suit and a tie and something like that, yeah? Okay, so Nagarjuna wrote several really important texts, and this one, Precious Garland, is one of them. So in one of the chapters, mostly chapter 3, but in some of the other chapters too, he talks a lot about, chapter 4, I'm sorry. But in other chapters too, he talks a lot about running a kingdom because he taught this text to a king. We're getting some feedback. That's better, I think. Is it? So he's talking to this king and giving the king practical advice. So it's quite interesting what he says. But before we get into that, I always like to sit quietly with people for a minute or two so we can change gear from running around all day to doing something a little bit more serious. Okay, so sit up straight, put your feet flat on the floor, and then your right hand on your left, the thumbs touching, that's in your lap, and lower your eyes. And just take a moment to scan your body and see if there's tension anywhere. For example, in your stomach, in your shoulders, if your jaw's clenched. If there's tension anywhere, then consciously release that. And then turn your attention to the breath, just letting the flow of your breath be normal and natural. Don't deep breathe, don't force your breath in any way. And simply observe what's happening as you inhale and as you exhale. If you get disturbed by a noise or a sensation or a thought, just notice that, but don't make a story about it, and instead return your focus to the breath. So your breath is like home. You keep coming home to the breath. And while you're watching the breath, be aware of how it's changing in each moment, how it doesn't remain the same. So I'll have a few minutes of silence to do that, and by keeping the mind on one object, in this case breathing, then the mind will settle down and become more peaceful. So let's do that. before we start the talk, let's take a moment and generate our good motivation and think that we will listen and discuss together this evening so that we can learn about how our mind works, learn about what causes suffering, what causes happiness, and learn how to train our mind in wholesome attitudes and emotions. And let's do this so that we can make a positive contribution to society and, in the long term, be capable of leading all beings out of the cycle of repeated problems and to an actual state of freedom and liberation. So let's make that our motivation for being together. So we always take a moment and contemplate our motivation before starting an activity, because our motivation is actually the most important element of what we do. It's not if we look good, it's not if others approve of us. Yeah, but the valuable thing is what is motivating us, what is our intention. Because I think we all know how to pull the wool over other people's eyes, don't we? Do you have that expression in Dutch? You know, you pull your cap down so nobody can see. Yeah. So we know how to manipulate people to make them think that we're good, even though our motivation may be completely rotten, like to get something from them. So we may look good to people and they may praise us, but that doesn't mean that what we're doing is something beneficial, because if our motivation is to get something for ourselves by deliberately deceiving or manipulating somebody, that's not so good, is it? Yeah. On the other hand, sometimes we can act with a sincere motivation, and other people misinterpret what we say and they get angry and upset at us. Okay? So here we see that, our motivation doesn't always match what other people think of us. Sometimes we act with a good intention. People appreciate our action. Yeah. Sometimes we act with a good intention. They misunderstand and criticize us. You ever had that happen? I think most of us have had that happen. Sometimes we act with a rotten intention, but other people think we're great. Yeah? And sometimes we act with a rotten intention, and they know it, and they let us know that we know it, that they know it. So what I'm getting at is, just because people are upset with us doesn't mean that what we did was bad. It just, we have to check our motivation to see if our motivation was good or bad, not what other people think. And similarly, we may have a very corrupt motivation, and other people may like what we do, but that doesn't mean that what we do is something virtuous, something beneficial. So much depends on our motivation. And this is one of the key factors in Buddha's teachings, so that the Buddha's always bringing us back to cultivating a virtuous motivation for what we do. Yeah? And so this is kind of the opposite from how we work in the West. Because in the West, at least in my country, and you can see it very clearly nowadays, yeah, what counts is what people say about you. Yeah, so we're always trying to impress people so that they praise us, so that we have a good reputation. Yeah, and that, when we have that motivation of eliciting a certain reaction from someone else, then we're losing touch with ourselves and what's really going on in our own mind. Because we're trying to do what we think other people think we should do. Or we're trying to do what we think will please other people so that they will like us. Okay? So something's not so clear-cut and honest about that. Yeah? So that's why we really try and pause and cultivate a good motivation in the morning when we wake up, before we start a new activity. Yeah? So that we're constantly monitoring our mind and trying to steer it in a positive direction that will have a good result. Yeah? You getting what I'm saying? Does that make some sense to you? Yeah. So, just to give an example, let's say somebody is fundraising for a charity. They want to build a clinic for people in an impoverished neighborhood. So there's some really rich guy, he gives, 100,000 euros. Everybody goes, wow, he's great, he's so generous. He gave 100,000 euros, And he knows that when somebody is a big benefactor like that, then in the entryway to the clinic, they're going to have a plaque, with his name on it, saying that he was a big donor. And he likes that idea. In fact, that was why he gave the money, because then everybody in the community would praise him and know how rich he was and think he was generous. Then, another person comes along who doesn't have very much money. They give 20 euros, but they think, may everybody who comes to this clinic be healed from whatever physical or mental disease they have, and may they live happily. And that person, gives their 20 euros. They get a receipt, but nobody praises them. And they certainly don't get their name on the plaque in the entryway. But who was the generous person? The one who gave 100,000 euros, or the person who gave 20 euros? Yeah, it was the person who gave 20 euros who was the generous one, wasn't it? Because he really cared about the health of the people, and that's why he was giving it. The guy who gave 100,000 euros was totally selfish. He was doing it for his own aggrandizement. Okay? So everybody praised him, but actually he wasn't very generous. People ignored the person who gave 20 euros, but that person was the generous one. Okay? So what I'm getting at is it doesn't matter how we look to other people. It matters what is going on inside here, because it's our motivation, our intention, that creates the karmic seed that will influence our future. Okay? So we're always looking at our motivation. So, as we start here, looking at Nagarjuna's advice to the king about, how to run the kingdom, then he starts with the motivation. And he says, and I'm quoting different verses throughout the whole text, so it's not in any order here. But he says, devote yourself to the Dharma of generosity, ethical conduct, and fortitude. King, if you undertake deeds that begin with the Dharma, have the Dharma in the middle, and the Dharma at the end, you will not be harmed in this world or the next. In other words, undertake deeds with when he says deeds that begin with the Dharma, he means deeds with a virtuous motivation. So have a good motivation when you're acting to do your job. Okay? So he's talking to a king, but it applies to our work too. It doesn't matter if you're a big CEO or the janitor or whatever. What's important is our motivation. So he's saying if you start your action with a good motivation, if you have a good motivation in the middle and complete the action with a good motivation, then in this life we won't be harmed, and also in the future life we won't receive harm. So that means when we act with a good motivation, more often than not, people pick up on our kindness and they don't want to harm us. Often, if we have a rotten motivation and we're trying to manipulate them, they can pick up on that. But, if we act sincerely, people usually respond sincerely. We aren't harmed. And we don't do harmful actions, deliberately trying to incite others or hurt them. So nobody retaliates against us. And similarly, because we do things with a good motivation, the karmic seeds, the energy traces, you could say, of our actions that abide with our mental continuity, that influence our future, those things will be good, and we also won't receive harm in the future. And so in specific, the things he's telling the king to practice are generosity, giving, which refers to giving material objects, but also giving support and love, giving encouragement, giving the Dharma, giving protection when somebody's in danger. There's many kinds of giving. So he encourages the king to be generous, to act with ethical conduct, which means having a good ethical code and living according to it, not cutting corners when it is self-serving to cut corners. And then the third thing he encourages the king to do is practice fortitude. So fortitude means the ability to have a strong mind when we face difficulties or harm or criticism or illness or something like that. So he's saying, this is the general framework, king, in which you need to act. So he's not saying, okay, if I can modernize this, do your actions that appeal to your base so that they will vote for you in the next election, regardless of whether those actions are beneficial or harmful. what Nagarjuna is saying is the opposite of that. Okay? So, he goes on to explain, if the king acts in a way that contradicts the Dharma, in other words, something that is non-virtuous, not wholesome, or does something that does not make sense, is confused and ridiculous, then most of his subjects still praise him. Hence, it is hard for him to know what is appropriate and what is not. So when you're in a position of power, all the people under you, they praise you whatever you do, because they want to be in your good graces. Yeah, they want to butter up. Okay. In American slang, we say they want a brown nose. Yeah. Yes, it's very graphic. Okay, in other words, kiss your behind. Okay. You'll learn the Dharma and American slang. Okay. Okay, but it's true, if you have a high position, the people under you, they want to impress you with how great they are. So even if you're doing something ridiculous, they won't tell you so, because they're afraid that you'll fire them or you'll harm them or retaliate or something like that. Okay? So, this even comes up in parent-child relationships. Yeah? When you were a teenager, did you always tell your parents the truth? How about now? Do we tell your parents the truth? Or do we just say what we think they want to hear, to avoid conflict and be in their good graces and not get cut out of their will? Okay? So it's very hard if you're a person in authority for people to speak with you frankly. So Nagarjuna is saying this to the king because the king is a bigwig. He's the ruler of a country. And let me continue reading because it becomes very interesting how Nagarjuna explains to the king why he's going to say what he's saying, because he's going to give the king an earful. Yeah? And a lot of advice that the king may not particularly want to put into practice. Yeah? But he has to prepare the king so that the king will actually listen to him. Okay? So he goes on and he says, even if it is difficult to say something beneficial but unpleasant to others, how can I, a monk, hope to do so to you, the king of a large realm? So Nagarjuna is being very humble. Yeah? He's saying, even in ordinary circumstances, it's difficult to say something that's beneficial to someone, but unpleasant for them to hear. Yeah. And we know that, don't we? Yeah, we know that. Sometimes we look at our friends or family members and they're at the edge, they're doing something that they're about to go down that slippery slope and, land in a morass, land in a marsh, make a big mess. And we try and talk to them to help them to see what they're about to do. And sometimes they don't react very well. Okay? Example, you have a family member who is an alcoholic, or drugs, takes recreational drugs a lot, and that person asks you, they're so intoxicated they can't go to work. So they ask you to call into work for them and make an excuse saying that they're sick with the flu and they can't come to work. Yeah. And you don't want to do that because it's not true. And you also know it's not beneficial because that just enables the person to avoid looking at their own addiction. So instead of doing that, you say, no, I'm not going to make excuses for you. Yeah. And if what I will do is I'll take you to a detox center. I'm happy to take you to a treatment center because, you're an alcoholic, you're a drug addict, and you need help. And you've got to clean up your life. And if you say that to that family member, are they going to look at you and say, oh, yes, you're absolutely right, let's get in the car and go? No, they're going to look at you and say, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not a drug addict, mind your own business. I ask you to do a small thing and then you start laying this big trip on me, giving me all such advice. But you don't know my life. And they get really mad at us. Okay? So it's hard to say things to people that are beneficial and truthful when sometimes it's unpleasant for that person to hear. Okay. Now, I know none of you respond that way when people give you advice. Yeah. You're very open and tolerant and receptive when other people say unpleasant things. It's just those other people who act like this, right? They need to change. Okay, so Nagarjuna is saying here, in normal circumstances, it's hard to say beneficial things that are unpleasant. But I'm just a monk, and you're the king of the kingdom, so it's going to be harder for me to say things, It's like, it's very interesting. So you know about the Parkland shooting in the US where 17 students were killed. So the Congress doesn't act because they don't want to, displease Trump. They don't want to displease some of their voters. So they just do what's not beneficial for the country to save their own position. Okay? The students, I don't know, did any of you see some of the video clips of when the students talked to Trump? They were very frank and honest. Yeah? And one of the students, I don't know if it was when they were talking to Trump or at one of the rallies, say, we don't have a job to lose. We don't have a position to lose. We just have our life to lose. And that's why we're speaking honestly. So those kids were gutsy. That took a lot of courage for them. Yeah, but it was wonderful what they did, and it was necessary for what they did. Yeah, and I think it changed many people's minds. It changed Trump's mind for about 5 minutes, but that's about as long as he can hold on to an idea anyway, without changing his mind. So I'm so glad there's free speech. I can say anything I want about him. Yeah. So the king is being very humble before he speaks to Nagarjuna is being very humble before he speaks to the king. But then he continues, he says, "But because of my affection for you, and also due to my compassion for beings, I myself will tell you what is quite helpful, but not very pleasant." So he's warning the king, kind of like, well, you've been running the kingdom one way, and I'm going to say some things to you because I care about you and I care about the people. But beware, these things are not always going to be pleasant for you to hear. Okay? And I think very often that's the way Dharma teachers are too, because, they know when they explain the Dharma is meant to push our buttons. Yeah? Because it's meant to point out to us our weaknesses and faults, as well as our good qualities. But the purpose of a Dharma talk isn't that everybody comes out feeling, oh, I'm such a wonderful person and life is so wonderful, because that's not really the case. Yeah? So you have to push people's buttons to get them to think and to change their ways. But sometimes they don't like that. Yeah? And so you can see when you're teaching the Dharma, sometimes you talk about some topic that somebody doesn't believe in or they don't agree with, and they're like, they're sitting in the audience like that. Yeah? You can just hear what they're going to say to you in the Q&A session. But, it's very important in Dharma that we really look at our foibles and notice our faults. Yeah? If we can't see them, then there's no way for us to grow. Yeah? It's like if you're going to clean the house, you have to see the dirt in order to clean. So if we want to clean our mind, we have to see the dirt, the rubbish in our mind. Yeah. But sometimes we don't like seeing our own rubbish. Yeah. We don't like a teaching that talks about anger, unless your husband or wife is there, and then you poke them and say, listen to this. Then we like the teaching about anger. But if we have to apply that teaching to ourselves, we don't like so much. Okay? So then Nagarjuna says to the king, realizing that what I tell you is helpful in this context and others, implement it for your own sake and also for the sake of the world. Okay? So I'm going to give you advice. Yeah, put it into practice for your own sake and also for the sake of the world. In other words, if you are doing something that is, from a Dharma perspective, really benefiting you, it's also going to benefit others. And if you do something from a Dharma perspective that benefits others, it's also going to benefit you. Now, usually we think that benefit or happiness is a fixed pie. So if other people benefit, I don't. If they're happy, then I'm not. I have to give something up. Yeah. What Nagarjuna is saying is that is not the case. Yeah. If we act with a positive motivation, a virtuous intention, what we do benefits us because we're creating constructive karma, and our action will also benefit everybody else because we're doing something with a good motivation and the action is going to help them. Okay? So to not see things as, if they're happy, I've got to be unhappy. Yeah. Or if I benefit them, then I'm missing out. Yeah. Let's not do this us and them thing so much, but to realize that we're all interconnected and benefit can happen to everybody in different ways, but from the same action. Okay, so Nagarjuna is speaking to the king in a pleasant tone of voice. He's conveying respect, he's conveying care, and he's also letting the king know that he understands the king's role and his experience. Okay? So Nagarjuna isn't sitting there sending out tweets at 3 a.m, telling the king, you're an idiot, you're the, what's the new one that he called Comey? Something slime ball, I don't know. Yeah. There's another word, but an untruthful slime ball. Yeah? So Nagarjuna is not speaking like that to somebody else. He's showing a good example of somebody who has a good intention, who shows respect to the person they're speaking to. Okay? Because, it's true. If we talk to somebody and we're disrespectful and we call them names and insult them, are they going to like us? Forget it, Yeah. Now, they may be afraid of us and do what we want, but that's very different than them liking us. And as soon as they can stop doing what we like, then it's all over. As soon as we can stop, as soon as the I'm getting confused about who I'm talking about. But if we act like with a bad motivation, we may intimidate somebody so they do what we say. But as soon as they can get out of that situation, they will. So it's kind of like a parent with a child. If you yell and scream at your child, depending on their age, when they're little, sometimes you have to not yell and scream, but you have to let them know this is really important. But when they're older, if you yell and scream, out of fear, your kids may do what you say. But as soon as they can, they're going to do something else. Yeah, and they won't listen to your advice. Yeah. If you speak respectfully to children, and that doesn't mean that you're giving up your role as the parent. You are the parent, but you treat the child with respect, and discuss something with them to help them understand a situation instead of just ordering them about what to do. Then, that child will maintain a good relationship with you and continue to ask for advice. Yeah. I see that with my sister. My sister's a very good mother to people, to her kids. Yeah? And as the result, all during the teenage years, into the early 20s, the kids, they confide in her, they ask her advice, Whereas both she and I, with our own mother, we didn't do that. Okay. So Dharma is the highest policy. Dharma pleases the world. Yeah, I did that already. Okay. So now he's going to start giving some social policy advice. And he's going to tell the king to invest in education, to pay the teachers well. Yeah. Do you know about the teachers' strikes in the U.S.? Yeah. In Netherlands too, really. Yeah. It's awful. what the governments do. We're trying to help the most vulnerable people who are going to be the future of the country. And what do? We slash the budget because we don't want to pay more taxes. Yeah, and it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's totally, I was a teacher before, in grade school before I became a nun. And, you know, it is difficult work to teach, and teachers deserve to be paid adequately, and schools need to be funded, you know, because otherwise, how are kids going to grow up well? Yeah. In my country, you know, the taxpayers, the voters, they're very willing to pay to, they're very willing, if the government wants to build a prison, to pay for a prison. But they're not willing to support government schools by higher taxes. Yeah, which is crazy. Yeah, because if you support the education system, you're not going to have as many people doing criminal activities, so you're not going to need the prisons. But if you don't support education and spend your money on prisons, yeah, that's not helping society as a whole, is it? Yeah, but people say, I don't want to, you know, I don't have kids anymore, so why should I pay for anybody else's education? Why? Because if those kids don't get a good education and there's no after-school activities, they're going to get into mischief, and it's going to be your house that they break into. Okay. You can see that nuns also have opinions about policy. Yeah, but my opinion agrees with Nagarjuna's opinion, okay? Yeah, so, and he talks also, so education, paying the teachers, supporting schools, helping the vulnerable populations, the elderly, the sick, the injured, yeah, not writing a tax bill that gives the rich people more money and makes the poor people poor. Okay, to pay doctors well, they are, at least in my country, that's already done. Yeah. And to pay other healthcare providers well, so that people have, you know, health care and their medical needs are taken care of. And he also is going to encourage the king to invest in infrastructure so that the society can function well. Okay. Now, I must say, in this book, yeah, I'm picking out certain verses from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland. In other chapters, he's going into very deep philosophy about the nature of existence. So in one text, you find this very deep investigation of how things actually exist, plus social policy. Yeah? So it's interesting, isn't it? It shows that when you practice a spiritual path fully, you're not only trying to look at the nature of existence and go on the appearance, go beyond the things of this world, but you're also trying to live in this world in a practical way that's going to benefit others. So those two things are simultaneous in a practitioner. As spiritual practitioners, you know, it's not about sitting in your blissful samadhi somewhere in a cave. Yeah? It's not about that. It's about knowing the nature of reality, but coming out and benefiting society. Yeah. So this is very much the bodhisattva ideal. Yeah. And the reason behind that is, even if you live in a cave far away from everybody else, you still live in relationship to everybody else. So relationship doesn't mean we have to be right next to each other, but we are interdependent. You know the thing about the butterfly flapping its wings in Singapore and then the hurricane starting somewhere else. Yeah? So it's this kind of interdependence. We are never separated from other living beings. So we've got to find a way to live together in relationship with them in a harmonious way. We can't just isolate ourselves because we're still related even when we think we're isolating. Okay, so Nagarjuna says, for the sake of increasing wisdom, provide for the livelihood of the schoolmasters in all the educational institutions of the land, and formally grant estates to them. So don't just pay the teachers, give them estates and land. Wow. You know, and why? For the sake of increasing wisdom. Because these are the people who are teaching the younger generation. And the younger generation are going to be the ones who make or break society in the future. Mm-hmm. With the proceeds from your fields, establish wages for doctors and barbers. Now, we wonder sometimes, barbers? I think in ancient India, the barbers also pulled teeth. Yeah? Even if you go to India today, you know, you walk down the street, sometimes somebody's getting dental work right there on the side of the dusty road. Okay, things are very public in India. Yeah, so I think barbers means dentists, yeah. But so he's telling the king, from the proceeds of your fields, in other words, don't ask people for more taxes, but from your own money, you give to doctors and dentists and other healthcare providers, for the sake of the elderly, from your own, treasury, king. You give for the elderly, the young, and the ill, so as to relieve the suffering of sentient beings. That's the advice he's telling the king. Yeah, take care of the people who live in your kingdom. Yeah, and don't just be a big, great king hoarding all your riches and refusing to release your tax return. Yeah, but use your money to be generous to the population, especially the people who need. Okay, so this is also good advice for us. Now we have many charities. We can help people through charities. We have. Do you have GoFundMe on the web? Sometimes people who are in difficulties put up projects on the web, and people can make donations to them. Yeah. Okay. So that's to help the vulnerable. Now he's going to talk about the infrastructure. You of good wisdom, establish rest houses and build parks and causeways, pools, pavilions, and cisterns. Provide for bedding, grasses, and wood. Okay? So, for travelers, have dress houses. Have parks where your population can go and spend some time. Causeways, make your roads good so people can travel easily. Pools, pavilions, so that, again, your population can have beautiful places to go with their families and spend time talking together and being with their families. Provide cisterns, bedding, grasses, and wood. Okay? In other words, for when travelers are going along the way, they need water. They need supplies. So have cisterns. They need places to stay overnight and to rest their animals. So provide bedding for them to sleep on, grass for their animals, and provide wood so that people can make fires and cook food. Yeah? So he's telling the king, yeah, be good to the travelers in your country. And, he's not even saying to charge the people. He's saying just make these things available for them to use. Okay. So can you imagine living in a society where these things were being made available? Yeah? Where people contributed through taxes or through generosity, so that there were so many public things that everybody could use and enjoy. Yeah, that would be very nice, wouldn't it? Hmm? Out of your compassion, always care for the ill, the homeless, those afflicted by suffering, the downtrodden and unfortunate. Respectfully apply yourself to aiding them. So again, reach out and take care of people out of compassion. So always care for the ill. Have free medical care. Do you have free medical care here? No? Yeah? But have medical care that's available for everybody. Yeah? In my country, sometimes people get such big medical bills that they become homeless because they can't pay the medical bills. Yeah, it shouldn't be like that. Yeah, take care of the homeless. Make sure there are shelters that are safe for people who are homeless. Many times homeless people don't go to shelters because it can be very dangerous for them. They get beat up, the few things they have get stolen in shelters. So, make places for the homeless to live. Yeah. Help those afflicted by suffering. So mental suffering, help the mentally ill, help the people who are grieving the loss of a relationship or the loss of loved ones. Help the downtrodden. So help minorities, help refugees, help people who are really in need. Yeah. I know the big refugee flood into Europe a couple of years ago. I really respected what Europe did in taking in so many people fleeing from the war in Syria and Afghanistan. When I think of what it must be like to live in those countries, yeah, with bombs dropping all around you, yeah, and you have little kids and you're trying to keep your kids safe, and there's bombs falling and your kids are screaming and the grocery store just got bombed and the school got bombed. I mean, of course you're going to try and get out of that situation. I can't imagine what it's like for people living in that kind of circumstance. Yeah, we're quite fortunate here. Yeah, I think most of us were born either at the tail end of the Second World War or after the World War. So we were spared the suffering, of the war in Europe. And due to the European Union having so many years of peace in Europe, it's quite a blessing. Yeah? And then the fact that you took in people fleeing from those kind of situations, I really respect. And I was very disappointed in my own country's response. Yeah, and especially the current administration wanting to set caps on refugees and illegal immigrants and so on. Because I know my own grandparents came to America as refugees. Yeah, so the whole idea of barring refugees from coming, kicking out, illegal immigrants who are coming because they're living in places who are suffering, I can't imagine that, Okay, so help those people, and you do it with respect. He says, respectfully apply yourself to aiding them. So you don't go, oh, you're some poor person, you can't get your life together, so yeah, we'll support you. Not like that, but with real, genuine respect. One of the people who studied with me some years ago, I gave them all the assignment in one class, to practice generosity in the upcoming week to people they didn't know, to strangers. And, because being generous to friends is easy. Being generous to strangers is more difficult. So I gave them that assignment and then said, let's come in the next week and let's talk about it. So one person shared the story. He was in Berkeley, California, and there's lots of people, homeless people living on the streets in Berkeley. And there was one woman sitting on the street, and he pulled out $1 or $2 or something. And he kind of bent down and with both hands, as a sign of respect, said, I don't have much with me, but I want you to have this. And handed the money to her directly. And she looked up with tears in her eyes because he had treated her with respect. Yeah, he offered the money himself, he looked her in the eye, he spoke kindly. And my guess is that probably meant more to her than the money did. Because many people just kind of walk by and throw something and walk away as fast as they can. Yeah. So respect is quite important to everybody. Yeah. Provide seeds and food to farmers who have fallen on hard times. Eliminate excessive taxes and reduce the portion of products taxed. Okay? So help the farmers, because sometimes there's a drought, there's a flood. Give them seeds, give them equipment, support them so that they can do their work, because they're feeding the rest of the country. And don't, when you tax people, don't overtax them. Okay? So don't set up, high tariffs on imported goods. No, but do things that are kind. Protect citizens from debt. Yeah. In my country, a lot of people who go to university find themselves afterwards with 2 pieces of paper. One is a diploma, and the other is a bill for incredible amounts of money to pay for their education. Do you have that happen here too? Yeah? Not so much, but still happening. Yeah? Okay? So to protect citizens from debt, yeah, especially students trying to get an education. I mean, because education is what really benefits the country, Education is really the basis of having a peaceful society. Okay, eliminate new tolls and reduce excessive tolls. So you may have to have tolls and taxes, but make them as low as possible. And, make the taxes equal. Don't have a tax plan like right now in my country, where the rich have all sorts of deductions and the poor don't. Yeah. Okay. Eliminate the suffering of those who wait at your door with their petitions unanswered. So, if somebody needs to see you as the king and they have a petition, don't keep them waiting for a long time. Translate this to modern times. Have an efficient bureaucracy. Yeah, so that people can file reports get the services they need, ask for whatever it is, and without having to wait a really long time to get things done. Wouldn't that be nice to have an efficient bureaucracy? Wow. Yeah. Okay, where are we? Okay. King, out of compassion, you should always make your mind focused upon benefiting all beings, even those that have committed the most serious mistakes. So now he's going to talk about prisoners and prison reform. Okay? So even people who've committed the most serious mistakes, try and benefit them. Don't just look at somebody and say, you're a criminal, lock you up, throw away the key. Try and benefit these people. Because, the penal system can work in two ways. Sometimes it's the punishment model, and it's just lock everybody up, with no job for them to work at while in prison, no classes for them to take while in prison. They just sit around and watch TV all day and make trouble with each other because the taxpayers don't want to pay for vocational training or high school equivalency diplomas or, things that would, or anger management programs, things that would really help these people so that when they're released, they can come out and be good citizens. They just want to punish. Okay? The other model is rehabilitation and trying to help people, gain the skills they need. So I work with inmates. I work with prisoners. And I can really see that these two philosophies about prisons have very different effects. The prisoners who are, most of them are treated with a lot of disrespect and a lot of scorn. And they've become criminals, or I shouldn't say become criminals, cross that out. They've done negative actions because they don't have self-confidence. Because they're acting out because of pain inside of themselves or because of poverty. One guy I wrote to, he got a long sentence, I think 27 years or something. And I asked him, what were you doing? And he was in his late teen years, so he was tried as an adult. He said, when you have younger siblings and you open the refrigerator door and all there is a box of baking soda to deodorize the refrigerator, then you have to do something to get food for your younger brothers and sisters. So he went out and staged a robbery. The police caught him. He got many years of prison. And when I first started writing to him, he was bad in prison. He was very disrespectful. He was sarcastic. He was always getting written up for offenses. And if you act poorly in prison, they throw you in what they call the hole, which usually means, sometimes it's called administrative segregation or ADSEG, or solitary confinement. In other words, you receive another kind of punishment on top of being in prison. Okay? So that was always happening to him. And, I should say quite frequently happening to him. And we began to correspond and, talk about the Dharma. He was quite interested in the Dharma. And talk about his values and his actions in our letters. And he got to the point where he wanted to take refuge in the 5 precepts. So I arranged to do that with the chaplain over the phone, because he lived about 2,000 miles away from where I lived. So he was in the chapel. I called on the phone, and we did the refuge and precept ceremony on the phone. And gradually, his behavior increased so much that instead of being in maximum security prison, they put him in minimum security. So he had much more freedom. He got released. Yeah, he's doing well now. Okay. So, but he's somebody, he belonged to a minority, so very easily he could have just gotten totally lost in the prison system. Yeah. So he's telling the king, focus on benefiting those people, even if they've committed the most serious misdeeds. Actually, one of the inmates I correspond with, he's an excellent practitioner, really good Buddhist practitioner. He's in prison because he killed his mother and stepfather. Talk about somebody who's committed a grievous crime, that's him. But he is a fantastic practitioner now, so much so that he was working in the chapel of his prison. When his chaplain got transferred to another prison, his chaplain wrote to him and said, "Would you be willing to transfer here also and become the clerk in my chapel?" That's how much the chaplain respected him. Yeah. So people definitely can change. Yeah. You should particularly have compassion for those that have committed the serious negativity of murder. Yeah. Because they're ones who have ruined themselves and are indeed worthy of a great person's compassion. So we usually think somebody who commits murder has ruined others and should be punished. And Nagarjuna is saying of course they've ruined others, but they've also ruined their own life. So I look at what happened at the Parkland High School. And, this 19-year-old boy, Nick Cruz, was a kid who needed help. Yeah. The social workers knew it, the police knew it. He fell through the cracks, nobody helped him. He got an AR-15, went into the prison, gunned people down. Okay? So he not only ruined their life, he ruined his own life. Yeah. They're going to try and give him the death penalty. So he could have a very short life, and the most he could ever help for is a life sentence without the opportunity for parole. Yeah. So he harmed others, but look what he did to his own life as well. Yeah. I saw a video of a reporter interviewing some of the students and asking the students, do you think that Nick Cruz should get the death penalty? And it was just a small group of students they were asking the question to. Most of the students said yes. One of them said, I want him to suffer. One of them said, his dying doesn't make up for the death of 17 other people. And I was really disturbed by the students' response, saying that they wanted him to have the death penalty, because it had seemed to me that the students were really acting out of compassion for future students and their contemporaries by trying to make schools safe by getting these assault weapons out of people's hands and having reasonable gun laws. And then to hear them have that vindictiveness against somebody really troubled me. So I did a short video and talking to them directly, talking about the disadvantages of holding grudges and how harmful it is to hold grudges to oneself, you know. Because, I mean, who suffers when we hold a grudge? We're the ones who suffer, yeah? If we rejoice in other people's suffering, what kind of person does that make us? How do we feel about ourselves? So I made a little video, and we're trying to somehow get it to their Facebook page or Instagram or whatever. I haven't received any replies from it yet, but so I hope they get it. I just thought, you know, the kids have been, you know, socialized that when somebody harms you, you want to retaliate and harm them back. And that's the idea of justice. Yeah, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. As Gandhi said, that would make everybody blind and toothless. Yeah? That's not justice. Okay? But that's what people are taught. And so I wanted to say to these kids, you have to investigate what society teaches you and see if it's correct or not. Because I think that kind of principle is not correct. And holding a grudge destroys everybody's life. Yeah, because, okay, so through this prison work, I've come to understand a lot of things. And I became friends with one woman who is a federal defender who deals with poor people who cannot defend themselves. Often people who are in capital cases, in other words, facing death penalties. So I had been working with one man on death row in Oklahoma, and she was the attorney who was defending him in his last hearing and trying to get clemency from the governor for him. It didn't work. But she told me that prosecutors, you know, they want to look good. They want to look like they're tough on crime. So they want to get a lot of death sentences. That makes the prosecutor look really good. So the prosecutor, you know, talks to the victim's family and encourages them, you know, to hate the person the perpetrator of the crime, and tries to tell the victim's family that, you know, once we have justice and the perpetrator has been killed, sentenced to death and killed, you will feel better because justice has been done. Yeah. And so this actually is what many people think, whether the prosecutor encourages them to think like that or not. People have that idea. And she said, because she's been to many executions as a defender, yeah, if the people she's defending, they still get executed, she goes to offer support to them. She's very compassionate. And she said never once has she seen the family of a victim feel better after the execution. Because as soon as the execution is over, the prosecutor, the media, the police just forget about the victim's family. They use them for their own purpose, and then they forget about them. And the victim's family is still there, you know, grieving the loss of their loved one. They don't feel any better because the perpetrator has been executed. And she knows because she's involved in all of that. Okay, so Nagarjuna is telling the king, these people are really worthy of your compassion. Then he says, either every day or every 5 days, release the weakest prisoners. What? What? You're going to release a prisoner because they're weak, because they're sick, because they're old? Yeah. In my country, they have, many states have laws that allow a prisoner to appeal to get out when they're on their deathbed so they can die outside a prisoner. The government, the prison warden, the prosecutor, turns it down. Yeah? Somebody's sick. They're dying. They're not going to hurt anybody. Yeah. They just changed a law. I forget in which state it was. So that if a female prisoner is in labor, she's not shackled. How kind and considerate. Yeah? You're in labor and you're going to run out of the room and escape. Yeah, you're in labor and you're going to go harm somebody else. So you need to be shackled. Yeah. Crazy, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so release the people that are weak, that are old. One guy I write to, he was 19 years old when he murdered somebody. He's in his late 60s now. They occasionally bring him up for parole, but they always refuse parole because of the severity of his crime, which is not going to change. Yeah, but they won't let him out, even though he's been acting very well. Yeah, he's been in prison, I would say, almost 50 years. Yeah, he's not going to harm anybody now. Another guy I write to, I could tell you prison stories a long time. I'll try not to do that. Another guy I write to, he was 16 when he killed somebody. He was a confused teenager with 2 of his friends that lured another friend into the forest and killed him for no explicit reason other than they were confused teenagers. Yeah. So he didn't get a death sentence. He got life without the possibility of parole. The Supreme Court has now, just in recent years, said that those people who were juveniles when they were sentenced to life without parole should have a chance at parole. Yeah. Then a few years later, they had another case that said that should apply retroactively to people who've been sitting in prison for a long time. So this one man, he was 16, who was a juvenile, got life without parole. He's been in prison 23 years now, okay? He is a model prisoner. He learned how to make videos in prison, so now he makes videos for the Department of Corrections. Yeah, so they call on him they transferred him to a different prison so that he could make videos for them, okay? He hasn't gotten citations. He runs a restorative justice program inside the prison. Restorative justice is where you get the people who have committed crimes. They take a class and they begin to deal with what they did. And then you have the victim's family, not the victims of the crimes that these particular inmates have committed, but families of victims from the same type of crime, and they bring them together to talk. And it's incredibly healing for both parties. Yeah, for the victim's family, this is what heals, not the death penalty. Because the victim's family can express their feelings and how shattered and upset they were when their loved one was killed. And the inmates can hear from a live human being about the effect of their actions. And that affects them. They begin to see that, what they do matters in the world. Okay? So this guy, Ron, has run all these restorative justice programs like this in the prison, making videos. He's done another kind of class. I forget what it's called now, but again, a class for helping the other inmates. And so we thought, if anybody is going to get out on parole, he would be the person who they would release. Also, one time I went to visit him in prison, and because it was a clergy visit, we were able to have a separate room. We didn't meet in the common visitors' room. And so the assistant warden walked me in, to the prison, and then afterwards walked me out. When we were walking out, I was talking to the assistant warden, and he said, Ron doesn't need to be in prison. So even the assistant warden saw it. Would they give him parole? No. Yeah. He's a completely different person than the crazy 16-year-old he was. Okay? So what Nagarjuna is getting across here to the king is, don't be like that. That just harms people. Yeah? And cuts off their potential to do good. Okay? So release them as is appropriate. In other words, don't be foolish about who you release. If somebody is clearly, you can see unstable and they could hurt themselves or hurt others, don't release that person. Keep them incarcerated for their own good. Yeah? Okay. From thinking that some should never be released, you develop behaviors and attitudes that contradict your precepts. From contradicting your precepts, you continually accumulate more negativity. So he's telling the king, if you think that, you form an image of these people, they are inherently existent criminals, they deserve to suffer, they should never get out, we should never even have classes to rehabilitate them or give them vocational training or anything like that. Then, king, if you think like that and act like that, you're contradicting your bodhisattva precepts. Yeah, to act with compassion. And when you break your precepts, it's not good for you. It creates negative karma. And until they are released, those prisoners should be made content by providing them with barbers, maybe dentists, maybe barbers too. Yeah, baths, food, drink, clothing, and medical care. In other words, don't treat them like scum. Okay. By way of foreign policy, Nagarjuna advises the king to care for refugees and offer assistance to countries that are suffering from environmental disasters or famine or war or disease, like Ebola, a few years ago. So reach out to those other countries. So Nagarjuna says, always care extensively for places in the world that are oppressed or where crops have failed. that have suffered harm, or where there is plague, or that have been conquered in war. Okay? I always think, wouldn't it be wonderful to sit down with government leaders and teach them this text? Yeah? Can you imagine having all the people from the EU here, the American Congress, you know? I think that would be great. One day. Okay. And then he gets into a lot of verses about the infrastructure. But I'm looking at the clock, and so I want to give you some time for questions and maybe answers. So let's have a little bit of Q&A. Yeah. Please ask your questions now. Don't think I'll go ask her at the end of class, because then the line goes clear out the door. So chances are, if you have a question, other people have the same question or comment. Nothing? There's somebody in the back.
What about the victims? They have to forgive the people who did it. Did you hear that?
Yeah, but could you translate?
Yeah, it was what about the victims that should forgive the perpetrators.
Yeah. So should the victims forgive the perpetrators? Again, I think yes, it's quite helpful to do that, because otherwise you carry around hatred and bitterness in your own heart. I met one woman, and she's a Dharma practitioner now, but before she knew the Dharma, her husband was killed. He was a police officer, he was a cop, and he was murdered in the line of duty. And she was so upset, and so were his parents. And they pleaded with the jury to give him the death sentence. And the jury did. Then, and of course, she was miserable. She was a widow. Her whole life had changed drastically. You know, having him on death row didn't help her feel better. And then she met the Dharma, and she started really thinking about her hatred for the guy who murdered her husband. And she began to see his suffering. Yeah. So instead of just focusing on her suffering, she focused on his suffering. And her mind began to change, and she no longer wanted him to have the death sentence. But it was a difficult situation, because the jury had or the judge had actually given that. And his parents still wanted the man to have the death sentence. She wanted to write him a letter to say that she forgave him. But the social worker said that she has to be very careful about doing that, and maybe have a social worker be there when the man reads the letter, because hearing that she forgave him could produce who knows what kind of emotional reaction in him. Yeah. But she said for herself, just coming to the point of forgiving him was very, very healing. Yeah. Okay.
thought about laying the karmic seeds and about wholesome motivation, bringing about wholesome life.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a difference between laying karmic seeds and, for instance, something like justice. Could you explain a little bit more about the
I don't think I said letting karma cease, because I'm not sure what that... Seed. Thank you. I can't understand English. Yeah, and I even have my hearing aids in, sorry. Okay, so karmic seeds. You know, the idea of karmic seeds is if you create virtue, you have the seeds of virtue. If you create non-virtue, you have the seeds of non-virtue. Those seeds may not ripen in this life, but unless the negative karmic seeds are purified or the virtuous ones destroyed by anger or wrong views, they will ripen in a future life, and that person will experience suffering. Okay? So, if you really want, if you think justice is the other person's suffering, they will suffer, just maybe in the next life. Yeah. But I really ask us to, look, and do we really want other people to suffer? Yeah?
So it's not really about that kind of justice. I was just a little bit reflecting that our motivation is important and it has some effect.
Yes.
In a calm way.
Yes.
And but sometimes I find it also quite difficult to keep really into that because well, I think many times a lot of difficult things are happening, like for instance in politics, it is quite difficult to just to see what happens with governments or with war, and then stay on this wholesome motivation about wholesome life.
Yeah.
That's what I find difficult.
Yeah. Okay, so let me see if I understand. You're saying that to be a politician and make decisions about war and so on is very difficult to know if what you're doing is virtuous or non-virtuous, is beneficial or not beneficial. Is that what you're asking? No. Okay, try again. Sorry. I want to understand. Now, I want to understand, so help me.
Maybe I'm not so clear in the question, but I just listened to you. I just thought about that the karmic system of cause and effect, and our the things we are doing to try to be a good person or try to do it. It is sometimes difficult to keep doing that. If you see how many difficult things or bad things are happening in the world.
Very true. Okay. Yeah, so you're kind of saying sometimes you want to do good, but it's very frustrating because there's so much negativity around you. Okay, now I got it. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Yeah, it can be very frustrating. And it's very easy for us to fall into despair and think, well, what's the use? I try and be a good person, but everybody else around me is corrupt. And, everything's, what do they say? We have another American saying, it's going to hell in a handbasket. Don't ask me what that means, but it's just, you know, a handbasket, like you're walking along, you know, like your nice baskets, and you're going to hell. Yeah. And so we just say, you know, what's the use? What's the use? Just forget it. Okay? And it's very tempting to say, just forget it. And what do we do if we say, just forget it? Yeah? We drink, we drug, we go shopping, we gamble, we do all sorts of other things to self-medicate our own pain. If we give up on the world and just sit there with the hatred and bitterness inside, we deal with it somehow by behavior that harms us. Yeah? It's all useless. I'm going to go to the bar. It's all useless. I'm going to take opioids. You know, it's all useless. Why don't I go gamble? Yeah? It's all useless. Then why don't I manipulate people and try and get what I want? Yeah? It's all useless. Why don't I go shopping? That's one of our great addictions, how we self-medicate our pain. We go shopping. It's true, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah, what do you do when you're depressed? You go to the shopping mall and get something nice that's going to make you feel better and use up more of the world's resources than is our fair share. You know? Or you stay glued to your phone and you surf the internet. There's all these new kinds of addictions. There's shopping addiction, gambling addiction, you know, digital addiction. You know, I mean, just look everywhere you go. People don't look at other people anymore. They're all like, you know, they're crossing a street. The cars are whizzing like this. They just keep on. Okay? So what good is that going to do? That's not going to help us. It's not going to help the rest of the world. What would happen if everybody in the world who was trying to be a kind person and a virtuous person just gave up? Then what would happen to the world? What would happen if the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas gave up on us and looked at us and said, you know, these people here, I've been trying to lead them to awakening since beginningless time, and look at them, you know? These idiots. Yeah? I know I'm a bodhisattva, but forget these sentient beings. You know, beginningless time is a long time I've been trying to help them, and they aren't getting it. So they want samsara, let them enjoy samsara. And the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas give up on us. Then what? Yeah? What's going to happen to us if they give up on us? Yeah. Well, we're quite fortunate they don't give up on us. So how can we give up on other people?
So we need to believe. We need to believe and trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, and keep that faith.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we need to. It's imperative. Yeah. For our own sake and for the sake of the world. Yeah. Okay, so we don't just, you know, throw it all away.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Well, sometimes I find it hard to make a choice whether to act or to not act.
Yeah.
Can I give a little example of what I experienced this week?
Mm-hmm.
I was giving a meditation class with a group of people, and there were some young guys. They were standing on the stairs. There's an emergency stairs. And they were knocking on the door and the window, making pictures, screaming, playing music, etc.
Mhm.
And one time they gave an enormous bang on the door, and we were just sitting in meditation, and everybody was really, me too. And I said to my students, well, try to take the noises from outside, integrate into your meditation. But my heart was pounding like madly. And they didn't stop. They went on and on and on. And at a certain moment, I thought, I really have to take the courage to interact with them.
Yeah.
And just ask them, well, can I have talk with you? We're having a class here. We really are startled by your noise. Can you please find another place? So I shared this with some people, and the reactions were really from here to there, all over the place. Some people thought I shouldn't have go out and talk with them. They said, well, when you feel disturbed by noise, you are not meditating at all, etc. So,
Yeah, you're right.
I got quite confused.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll tell you another prison story. Okay. So one of the guys I know who was in prison, the Buddhist group was meeting in a room, meditating, and some other guys in the prison walked by, looked in the room, started pounding, making noise, screaming, and so on. Yeah. And he wasn't leading the class. He was one of the people in the class, in the meditation class. He got up, he went to the door, opened it, and said, we're meditating, would you like to come in and join us? Yeah, please come in and join us. And that was it. They left after that. Because he really sincerely said, please come in and join us. Yeah, they all walked away.
It's motivating.
Yeah.
They walked away?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they didn't come in and join the meditation. But he would have been quite happy if they had. Huh?
I will consider it. That really takes courage.
Yeah. Okay, so let's conclude the evening. Let's sit together for just a few minutes. You know, a silent meditation. For about a minute or two, I call it digestion meditation. Yeah, so that you had a rich meal of the Dharma, so now let's digest it. So think about what you heard in such a way that you can remember it and take something home with you that you can practice. And then let's rejoice that we had the opportunity to share the evening together and investigate something that's really worthwhile and wholesome. So let's rejoice at the good energy, positive potential, good karma that we created. You can even think of it as a light at your heart that radiates out, and shining on all the living beings, bringing them peace. And then let's dedicate our merit for that purpose, so that sentient beings can discover peace inside themselves and progress along the path to awakening and live together peacefully now. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. So thank you, and see you tomorrow.